So a lot of people like the quadratic formula because it can be used on any quadratic. You don't have any of these conditions like we do up here where A needs to be 1, B needs to be even, and or like on the first problem where we can't have a B, your B has to be 0, or maybe there's only a few that are factor. Quadratic formula works every time, no matter what. Sometimes they are real answers. Sometimes they are rational with a fraction. They come out with a fraction. Sometimes they're imaginary. You come out with an I, but it can always be used, and these are the steps. You do need to memorize the quadratic formula. You can sing it. There's a song. I've played it for you, I think, in class. If not, remind me, and I will play it for you. But oftentimes you do have to simplify radicals, so that's the stumbling block for some people. So the quadratic must be set equal to 0. So everything needs to be on one side of the equation. So I'm going to subtract the x and add the 2, and I'm going to subtract the x and add the 2. So I end up with 0 on this side, and this side I have 5x squared minus x plus 2. I then need to identify my values of a, b, and c. I find it extremely helpful to write them down. The number in front of the squared term was 5, the number in front of the x term is a -1, and the number in front of the c, or the number without a variable, the constant, that was a 2. So my a, b, and c are 5, -1, and 2. Now I'm simply going to write the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root. Be sure you put this in parentheses. B squared minus 4 times a times c. The fraction bar goes over the whole thing, 2 times a. Okay, so I've done step number 1. This is step number 1, set it equal to 0. Step number 2, identify what the A, B, and C are. Step number 3, replace the letters with the numbers. So I'm going to write the negative sign down, and I'm going to just type in or write down the -1. You're going to be using a calculator to do part of the simplifying for you. I think that's the smartest thing to do. So the negative, this negative is from right here. This negative, let me say that again. This negative right here, this negative right here is from this negative. I just brought that down. This negative right here came from that b being a negative. So the negative that's in front of the b, and the b was a -1. So I just wrote that down exactly the way I did it. I'm going to write down plus or minus. I'm going to write down the square root. I'm going to put a parentheses and a 2 on the outside of the parentheses, and in the parentheses where the b is, I'm going to put -1. It is very important that you write that parentheses right there. 9 times out of 10, when a student messes up on a quadratic formula problem, it's because of this number right here. Calculators insist that you put those that negative number in parentheses before you square it. Then I'm going to put the minus from the problem. I'm going to put the 4. You can put a dot for times. I like putting parentheses because if I have negative signs, it keeps them straight. The A is a 5 and the C is a 2. And that radical goes all the way over there, all over a big fraction bar, 2 times 5. There's no reason why everyone can't get here. I have absolutely positively 0 sympathy for students who miss this part, because it's literally plugging in, replacing a number for a letter. Now you do want to use a calculator at this point. And you can use the TI Inspire, or you can use the Desmos calculator. It doesn't matter. But when you have minus a negative, that ends up being just a regular one. You're going to do plus or minus. And then you're going to write the square root formula, the square root, the radical. It doesn't need to be big because there's just going to be one number underneath there. And then you're going to write down 10. Where did the 10 come from? 2 times 5. everybody should be able to do this step as well, because all we're going to do is use the calculator to give me this value, and I'm going to put that number right there. So whatever calculator you want to use, you should grab it and enter this part of the quadratic formula into the calculator. I have it entered on Desmos right here, -1 squared minus 4 times 5 times 2, or b squared minus 4 times a times c, came out to be -39. I did the same thing on the classroom calculators, the TI Inspire. I will show you both of these will give you the wrong answer. If you just do -1 squared minus 4 times, or if you leave the parentheses off, it gives you the wrong answer, -41. Same thing would be true over here. If I just took these parentheses off, it gives you a different answer. So be sure you put the parentheses around that B term, and what we're going to put in here is that -39, and then it says simplify the radical if possible and simplify the fraction if possible. The radical can be simplified. Why? Because we have a negative number in there. So you guys know from the practice that we did on the beginning of the week that that needs to be rewritten with the I out in front. That negative sign comes out to make an I, and then we're going to rewrite the square root of 39 over 10. This can be rewritten as a complex number. We talked a smidge about complex numbers. I don't think it's necessary, but you can put this 10 in the denominator for the 1 and the 10 for the denominator here. So this becomes 1/10 plus or minus I, and then square root of 39 over 10. These two answers right here, this answer and this answer, are the same answer. This is just rewritten without the fraction simplified. It's not written as a complex number, but this one is written as a complex number. And again, we'll do some more exercises. I am not going to be lenient on you not being able to do this step, because this step is extremely doable. Let me get a color. This step right here is very doable. This step right here is very doable. Don't start making mistakes until you get maybe to this step right here. This would be the first time where I would say, oh yeah, I can see why you did that. There's no excuse for messing up on this step. There's no excuse for messing up on this step, because it's simply plugging in a number, letting the calculator do your work, and then from there is when it gets tricky to know how to simplify that radical or to rewrite it as a complex number.